So welcome to Tableau for Finance. What I'm going to do over the next half an hour is walk you through some of the different use cases with Tableau and your finance departments. Now I'm going to quickly jump into some of the common data sources that we use here at Tableau that might be used by some of you. I'm not going to go into great detail on these because you'll be able to review them at length with the recording, but I wanted to show you just high level how we connect to Salesforce and bring that information into Tableau. So we're using the API to ETL that information into a SQL Server database that we call Alpo, and then all of our users are then able to connect Tableau directly to that database. With NetSuite, we're doing something very similar. In this case, we're using their ODBC driver, and we're ETLing that information into a SQL Server database that we call the Financial Master. With Agencia, we are downloading CSV files using Alteryx as a means of doing some file standardization so that we then can also load that information into a SQL database. A recent data connection for us is Concur. So we're actually using their business intelligence reporting platform, creating some custom Excel files that we're then manipulating in an Access database and then producing Tableau data extracts. And Workfront, some of you may know as AppTask. We're using their API to ETL that information. So over the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you how we're using data from some of those different data sources. So for any of you that are public companies and have your stock traded on an exchange, you probably care a lot about what the analysts are saying about your company. So here's an example of a dashboard that we built internally that is taking all of the analysts' information that's being published. It is being gathered in an Excel file, and then this Tableau workbook is sitting on top of it. So if you were going to be setting up for a call with an analyst, you might come in here, select that firm, know who you're going to be making the call with, see what the different metrics were that they had reported on, and then you'd be able to see how their overview compared to the guidance of the company as well as some of the other analysts that are out there reporting on your stock. So we could use the action filters up here at the top, or we could do some highlighting down in the lower graphs as well if we wanted to look at any outliers that we wanted to look at. The user has the ability through parameters to change the reference lines that are showing up on these graphs. So let's say we want to change it to 200, and we'll see that the guidance changes on the graph. Using the same data, what we've done here is we've filtered it down to just those analysts that were reporting above guidance, so we could better understand why they may have done so. One of the other things that we discovered in building this dashboard too is it gave us a means of validating the data. We originally used a third party to gather some of this information for us, and we were discovering that they were making errors in the capturing of that information. So it's led us to have conversations with that third party, but also it's led us to maybe do some more of the data gathering with internal resources. But let's say we wanted to see what D.A. Davidson said about us. Using action filters here, we now can filter this bottom portion to see what their quarterly results were, as well as what their annual forecasts were. Now here's just an example of something that you could do with Tableau. Now we're gathering a bunch of different information on this dashboard that we're using for our external investor reporting. So we have some bar graphs up here at the top showing our revenue and operating income. But then we're also then showing the table version of those same things. So we get a mix of the graphical visual analytics, but also then kind of the cross-tab numbers that some of the folks in finance and accounting you're used to looking at. We're then calculating some of the year-over-year percentage changes as well as the dollar changes that are happening here. Now, the revenue is coming from the income statement portion, and then of course our cash and deferred revenue is coming from the balance sheet. And the headcount information that we're presenting here isn't coming from NetSuite at all. Our headcount information is stored in a separate data source, but you can see here on the dashboard that we're able to bring in data from multiple data sources. Now, depending on how your organization is set up and what is key metrics for you, now Tableau, of course, we care a lot about sales. So here's an example of a dashboard that we put together that's used by our executive team and others to just kind of high-level see how the different sales teams are doing. So this blue bar here represents the amount of business that they've closed in the period that's being reported, and the orange bar is representing how much is in the pipeline. Now, we use pipeline probability ratio ratings on our deals. So things that are earlier in the sales cycle are going to have the lower probability of closing in that period versus things that are farther along in the sales cycle. And what this gray line is doing here is then showing, well, let's say that all 2.4 million of this closed, what would be the impact to bookings? Now, down here at the bottom, we're adding these two bars together and then comparing them to what the kind of the goal, or you will, or the quota that particular team might have. Now, this is just an image of the dashboard, so I can't show you any of the action filtering here, but you could click on any of these bars and actually drill down into the teams that make up these departments and even go all the way down to the sales rep level. Now, sticking with sales, if you do have quotas or any sort of guiding benchmark that you're shooting for, sometimes you might want to say is, how is this current period comparing to prior periods? So what we've done in this dashboard is we've actually normalized all of the periods. So we can see 180 days before that period closed, as well as 90 days before that period closed. How is any quarter comparing to another? And the user over here has the ability to filter the period of time that they're looking at, also change the date range they want to be looking at, and if they wanted to exclude any of the particular sales cycles. Given the business model that Tableau has, and maybe some of you have as well, we care a lot about repeat business. Those customers that purchased a couple of years ago, how much are they continuing to purchase with us? So here's an example of kind of a stacked cohort bar chart. And what it's doing is it's color-coded each of the years that that customer first purchased with us. And then we're showing how much that customer has continued to purchase with us over the years. Now, given the type of revenue that Tableau has, we're selling licenses, but we're also selling maintenance and services. So from an accounting perspective, we have to handle this revenue in slightly different ways. So we're using this dashboard essentially as a modeling tool to predict how much income, revenue, you will, is going to hit the general ledger compared to the bookings that are coming in through our CRM system. So what the user has the ability to do on this dashboard is pick the type of revenue model or view that they want to look at. Here, the dashboard's been selected or pre-selected to a weighted pipeline average, and the user has the ability, or custom pipeline weighting, the user has the ability to enter in a number here or use the slider to change what they want to use as far as the pipeline weighting. They also have the ability to use the standard pipeline that we have in our CRM system, or they could just look at straight bookings. Now, just as we've done in some of the other dashboards, we're showing the raw numbers and then calculating some of the metrics that somebody would care about. But we're also then visually showing the growth and then using dual axis charts showing the percentage change that's happening as well. Here's an example of an executive summary. And if you look closely, you'll see that there's different information that's coming onto this dashboard. So we're pulling bookings up here in the left-hand corner, and the bookings are coming out of our CRM system. But our revenue and deferred revenue and some of the other balances that are showing here are coming out of our general ledger. So we're connected to multiple data sources on the same dashboard to present the information to our executive team. And just as we've done on some of the other dashboards, we're showing just the high-level numbers and showing kind of a breakout of some primary categories that would exist. But then we're also showing the months that make up those quarters, so we can see if one month is contributing more than any of the other three. So some of you might be going, well, it looks like an income statement, but our income statement looks different. Well, I'm sure it does, but the reason why that we've presented the income statement in this way is we didn't want to lose the functionality and the capabilities of Tableau. So while this is an image and I can't show you, if you hovered over here, there'd be a plus or a minus. So there's a hierarchy that's built into this structure. So the user has the ability to say, okay, I only want to look at revenue as it's rolled up, or I want to expand and be able to see license and other revenue. And depending on how the hierarchy was built, they would actually be able to expand it even farther to see some of the accounts that are behind this. Now, Tableau does a really good job of handling dates, so there's also a hierarchy here on the year. If I expanded this, I would see quarters, and if I expanded on it again, I would be able to see months, all showing the level of granularity and being able to calculate the variance that someone looking at this report would want to see. But what we've done to make sure we don't lose any of this functionality is we've pre-calculated all of the subtotals that your accounting team would want to see in the income statement, and we floated them here on the dashboard. So as the period of time is changing, or as the forecasting version that they're looking at, or if they're toggling in and out any of the other things they would want to filter on, all of these numbers are going to be changing at the same time. So most organizations are going to have a purchasing department, and you're going to be wanting to look at how those purchase orders are doing. What are some of the top vendors that you're using? What are some of the key KPIs or metrics that you care about? So let's select a subsidiary here, and you'll see that through action filters, I now have highlighted that subsidiary for quarter one. I can see the vendors that are contributing to the purchase orders, not only from a dollar perspective, but also in the quantity of purchase orders that we're also generating. And let's say I don't want to just look at one quarter. What if I want to look at the entire year? So now I can see that it's highlighted the periods in the stacked bar chart, but it's also presented. Now, with Tableau and the generation of revenue, well, it's great that we sold something, but we have to make sure we can collect the money too. So here's a dashboard that we've built that's looking at our accounts receivable. Now, the user of this dashboard can use it in a variety of different ways. But let's say our CFO comes to our AR team and says, you know what, how much do we have outstanding that's more than 120 days? So using the action filter here on the column, I can now see that there's 3 invoices that are over 120 days old. So now the AR team has a choice. We need to either contact these customers and see how we can collect this money, or we're going to have to write this off. Now, it's one thing to look at the column, but let's say your AR team is set up geographically or even by country. Well, let's say you support Canada. A little easier to select the name over here than it might be to select it on the map. But now I've highlighted the map as well as all of the customers and the invoices that owe us money that reside in Canada. One of the other features of this dashboard is, well, how would I contact this customer to collect that money? Well, what we've done is we've actually built in a URL action that would take us directly out to Salesforce, and we would be able to look at this invoice in the system, and we would see, when was the last time that we contacted that customer? Well, maybe we just called them yesterday. We're not going to want to call them again today. But what if it's been a couple of days? Or maybe there's some notes on the case that we need to be aware of to communicate with others. As you can imagine, not only are we trying to collect all that money, but we might care about how customers are paying us. So what we've done with this dashboard is we've looked at the different payment methods that customers are using. So if they're making small purchases, they most likely will be using a corporate credit card or even a personal credit card. But a bigger purchase, they're going to use an EFT or a wire. And in some cases, they're actually going to issue a check. So just as we've done on some of the other dashboards, is we're showing some of the raw numbers here and being able to give you some subtotals by the categories as well as some grand totals for the years. But instead of making this top part noisy with percentages, what we've decided to do is then just create a stack bar chart to show you the percentage that's being contributed in each period on each of the types. So we'll have checks down here at the bottom, EFTs and wires in the middle, and then credit cards up at the top. And so this is showing you kind of the percentage as far as the number of transactions that are happening. But you can see there's a very big difference in the distribution of the amounts. As you would expect, credit cards are going to be low dollar but high quantity, whereas EFTs and checks are going to be maybe lower quantity but higher dollar amounts. And so we've also calculated kind of the average transaction size that also the customers are paying us with, so we can look at some trends there. Now the last dashboards I'm going to show you are centered around travel data, and then I'll move into a demo where we'll show you how to build the AR workbook. So here's an example of what we've been able to build using some of the data that's coming out of Agencia. So this is just a summary dashboard that your executive team or your travel team can come into and see how much are we traveling in Asia or in the UK or in the United States? How much is it distributed over the different travel types? Well, one thing that you might notice on this dashboard, if you've played around with Tableau enough, is I don't see any filters here. Well, the filters are here, but what we decided to do is hide them, if you will. So what we're doing is we're using the color legend as a filter as well. So if I click on air, I now can see that I filtered to air in my summary, as well as all of the top vendors that are traveling through air. And you can see that there's some action filtering happening here as well. So as I scroll down through each of the vendors, I can see that the chart on the right is being highlighted to show how that airline is contributing. Well, let's say I care about air, but what if I care about air only in the UK? So now I've then filtered the data down even farther to just that region as well as that travel type. With any travel analysis, it always ends up with trying to find out how much any particular person may have traveled. So here's just kind of a traveler spend analysis showing us some of the same groups that we were seeing before. Now we're seeing our cost centers. Now we're seeing all the different employees. Well, you probably would want to hone in on the first 2 or 3 people that are spending the most. So if I highlight this employee ID, we can see that they are in the US office and what their budget center is. And now I can see their distribution of travel, and I can see how much they're spending. And down here at the bottom, I can also see their itinerary information. I can see in December of 2013, this person flew to Philadelphia and then stayed in a hotel. And so you could use this as a means of just monitoring, but also you could use it for comparing against your travel policies and even vendor analysis. So this map is a little bit busy, and I've pre-filtered it down to just non-US travel, but the user has the ability to look at travel just inside of the US or flying out of the US into other countries. And the user also has the ability to look at the different segments that are happening with this travel. So let's say I only care about all the flights that are originating from San Francisco. And now I can see all of the airports that they flew into and how much they incurred in that travel. And we've enriched the tooltips here to see that we spent $72,000 and there was 45 flights between San Francisco and Singapore. And the average flight was $450 per segment. So typically in the U.S., there's going to be more car rentals than you would have in any of the other countries. So we've kind of hard-coded the map here just to be the U.S. But let's say we want to see what we're doing in Texas. So what we've done is we've highlighted now the types of car rental types, and also see how much it's costing per day, how many days they're actually renting, and giving us some vendor analysis here. So we can say, hey, you know what? Every time we go to Texas, we could save $5 by using one vendor over another. Unless you have a really big preference, we would prefer that you do that. It would also give you leverage to work with your travel agencies and others on potentially negotiating different rates. So rounding out the travel story is hotel. So we've presented the data in some slightly different ways than you might be used to looking at it. We're showing the different cities that somebody was staying in. We're showing some period of time here. But let's say October 2014 looks kind of interesting. What happened here? So selecting the bar, we can see the different cities that people stayed in, the different hotel chains and the branches that they went on. Let's filter in even farther to Dana Point, since they're kind of an outlier here. And now we can see how much was spent and where they stayed. So there's a couple of questions that have come in through chat that I'll try and answer really quick before I move into a live demo. So somebody was asking, where did I find the info on the external investor dashboard? Well, that information is just being pulled directly out of some summary tables out of NetSuite, which is our general ledger system. Somebody else is asking, how can I access these workbooks and data sets after the presentation? Contact your sales rep, and they would be able to send you some of these workbooks. They wouldn't be able to send you all of them, but of course this entire presentation is being recorded, so you can look at it later. Are there any other presentations available? Yes, there are, and I'll show you those at the end. Okay, so now I'm going to move into a live demo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you could build the AR dashboard. So this is a dashboard that we saw on the slide deck that I just went through. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to step you through the steps that we took to build this. I may not add all the functionality in the interest of time, but hopefully you'll get an understanding of how you would do this. So here is the AR data set that we're connected to. And you'll see that there's some fields here that just came as part of the data set, but then there's some calculated fields. So what I want to do is show you how we calculated some of those. So the first one that you're going to care about is, well, how much is still outstanding? So from the data set, from the dimension, the measures that we already have available to us, we know what's the gross amount, what's the invoiced amount that the customer owes us, and we also know how much they've paid. So the difference of those two then is going to be the net amount outstanding. So it's just a simple subtraction here to get to that value. Now we wanted to bucket all of the AR into some different categories. So here are the groups that we decided to make. So we have days past due, which essentially is just a calculation of when the invoice was due based on a fixed date in this case. But for you, we would just use whatever today was for your live dashboard. And so we listed anything that essentially is calculating as a 0, which means it has a due date that's beyond today. And then we've bucketed everything into the 1 to 30, 31 to 60, and so forth. So the last calculation that we want is something that we're going to use on the map. And what this is doing is we want to take all of the business that is due in any particular country and represent that as a weighted average. So here's just the calculation that we did to sum up all the days due times the amount that they owe us, and then dividing that into the total amount outstanding. So those are the three calculations that we didn't have in the data that was coming out of NetSuite. So the first dashboard, or the first sheet that we want to create for our dashboard was the AR by customer. So let's go ahead, double click on company. Now we have all of that. Let's double click and see our AR aging buckets. Then let's double click on the net amount outstanding. That's great. It's starting to look like what we have on the dashboard, but there's a couple of differences. One is these column headings aren't in the order that I want. So I have two ways I can fix this. I could either drag the column over and say, okay, that's how I want them all to be sorted, or I could actually go up and change the default sorting for this category. So right now it's just set to data source, but I could set it to manual and then move current up, and then everywhere where this gets used, they're going to automatically be sorted in that way for everyone else that's using it. So we're getting closer, but we're still missing some other data. We still don't have a row total. So let's go ahead and go up to analytics. Let's add a row. So now we can see the total that each company owes us. We already changed the sorting of the columns, but we need to sort the rows. We want to see who owes us the most. So we'll just select grand total here, or we could actually go up and right-click, hit sort, and change the sorting here as well. So in Tableau, there's usually multiple ways that you can get to the same result. So the last thing we don't have is the colors. Well, let's take our AR aging, drag it over colors, and now we can see the color coding that we've attached to each of those categories. So great, part one is done, or part two. Now let's look at the next thing. Well, I don't want to double click on country, because if I do, it's going to by default try and create a map because it sees that it's a geographic field. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to drag it out now as a row. So now I have all of the country names, and I want to see how much they owe us, but I want to see that as a percent of total. So what I'm going to do is change this right here with a simple table calc of percent of total, but I also want to see the dollar amount. So I'm going to, double click that. I want to change how the order of those. I could either change it here, or I could have drugged them there. Now I need to change the sort. So change the sort. So now we can see the U.S. has the most, 14 million, and it makes up 20% of the total. But by default, Tableau doesn't have a grand total. Well, let's go ahead and add that as well. So analyze, add a column. Now we can see that we have a grand total, and it all adds up to 100%. Okay, part two is done. Now let's look at all of those invoices so that we can actually build that URL action out to Salesforce or whatever system is storing your invoices. So we're going to take our invoice numbers. Let's just go ahead and double click on company so I don't have to drag it out. Let's double click on AR aging so we have that as well. But we also, and then we need to see our total. But just like we had with the countries, this isn't the order we want to see it in. We want to see the largest invoices at the top. So a couple of different ways that we can do that. So the simplest is just to come up here, hit descending, sum, and now we can see that the largest invoice that's owed to us is the $200,000 from company 283, and it's in the 60 to 90 days. So we've changed the order. Let's go ahead and get the colors on there. And just as we had before, we can and then we have our column total. Now what we don't have is we don't have that URL action. So opportunity ID is the field that we use. Drag it out to the tooltip where you can do a level of detail. And now I can see that I have that URL action available to me. Now I had already pre-built that, but I'll show you what that would look like. So just putting in your server path or your URL path to Salesforce, and then just telling it that I wanted to use that opportunity ID as the means of doing that join. Great. Third part's done, but now we need the map. So I kind of already showed you the trick on how we could do the countries. So instead of dragging it out, I can double click since Tableau has already identified this as a geographic field. Well, I don't want little circles. I want it to be a filled map. So let's go ahead and switch it from automatic to be a filled map. Well, that's great. Now it's all filled, but those aren't the colors I want. So on this one, we don't want to use the net amount outstanding, or the AR aging buckets. We want to use that new weighted average total that we had. So let's put that on there. And then Tableau defaults to the colors. Well, those still aren't the right colors that we wanted either. So let's go ahead, edit the colors. I'm going to set it to 5 steps. I'm going to go from red to green. So let's go this way. Let's do temporal. Let's adjust these. All right, so now our color range is set up the same way we had on the other one. The color palette looks like we're getting closer. So let's put all this together. So we have a blank dashboard here, and now I could either drag it out, or I could double click, and Tableau is going to automatically bring them all out there for me. Well, these aren't presented the way that I want them to be. And I don't really want to show the air aging bucket color. So I'm just going to take that off. I'm going to take my map. Let's move it up here. We have our countries up there. Oh, we had our customers over here, so let's move them. We really don't want to lose all this real estate with that color legend, so we're going to float that, make it a little bit smaller, bring it out over here. Let's set the size of this to be fit width. And we have some pounding issues there, so let's drag this over, try and get it all to fit. And we don't have that side scroll bar, that's good, but let's go ahead, just set it to fit width, just so as we play around with stuff, we don't break it. A little too much real estate being used there. Let's make the map a little bit bigger. Okay. So we're getting close. Okay, undo, drag it. I don't know why it's doing that. Anyway, so quickly there, a couple of minutes, showed you how you could take all this data, bring it out to a dashboard that would be useful to your organization. So somebody had asked if there were any other, before I jump into some other resources, a couple questions have come in. So someone asked whether or not Tableau can get to QuickBooks. I believe that QuickBooks is one of the data sources that's coming very soon if it isn't already out. So contact your sales rep and they can tell you if that's an available data connection, but I know that it's coming. So as far as some of the other resources that are available to all of you, so I've had the fortune in the last couple of years to speak at our Tableau conference. So here are some URLs to take you out to the content that's on those sites. So you'll be able to look through the slides as well as the commentary that went along with all those, and you'll be able to see a broader variety of ways that finance organizations can be using Tableau. So at this point, we'll just go ahead and open it up to any additional Q&A. The last question that came in was, how do you refresh your data? So it all depends on the data source. Our Salesforce data is pretty much being refreshed at real time. So every couple of minutes, it's re-querying out through the API and bringing that information into our databases. Our NetSuite data is being refreshed multiple times through the day. We haven't found the need to have it be any more real time than that. The only time that the accountants really would want to see a journal entry right away might be during your close cycle. And most of your, your FP&A teams and some of those probably aren't going to be doing their analysis until after your period is closed as well. And then the other data sources, so the Agencia data as well as the Concur data, we're only grabbing that information once a week. And then the ATTAS data, which was the last one that I showed, is also being refreshed multiple times throughout the day. So a lot of different questions that are coming in, which are great. Someone asked, what do we use for budgeting and rolling forecasts? Well, as most organizations, we started out in Excel. We have since put some models into Anaplan, and we're building out some of our budgeting and forecasting in Anaplan. And then we're taking that information from the Excel models as well as from Anaplan, and we're loading it into some tables so that in SQL Server, so that it's easier for us to get at the actuals as well as the budget information at the same time.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Can you tab back to the finance resources, please?
Yep.
Thank you.
Let's see. So the recorded version of the sessions, they're all, again, available on that link that we're showing now. Lots of questions. I'm trying to keep up with them. Variance, how do you have the variance calculation available? The variance calculation is just taking the two measures and then subtracting them from each other. So we have the budget value is coming in as a separate value from the actuals and the forecast. So that's how we're just doing a simple subtraction against those two. Are you joining all the data to one source or doing custom SQL? It all depends. Sometimes we're using custom SQL. Sometimes we work with our IT organization and we've built out some views on the SQL Server side. But there's other times where we're rapidly prototyping and we don't have those resources available to us, and then we're using the data blending capabilities of Tableau, as long as we have some identifier in those two data sources that we can bring together. A really good example is some of the work that we've done with our headcount and our travel data. So a common metric that an organization might have would be, travel per FTE. And so by being able to join on the period of time as well as departments, we were able to do some of those calculations. So the question is, if you're linking directly to a data source for live updating, how do you ensure the data is clean, ready for Tableau to best utilize? Well, the great ways Tableau is used for us as well as for other customers is we use it for data validation. So we're looking for outliers in the data, looking for somebody that might have keyed something in incorrectly, and then going back to the source systems and updating that information. Tableau doesn't know if the data is bad. That's up to the users to know the reasonableness of the data and hopefully have some checks and balances in there. So that's the best I can do to explain that. Can you show how you added the URL tooltip again? Yes. So so you can only build a URL action based on something that you already have on your dashboard. So here, if I just go up to worksheets and actions, so right now I already have this one that was pre-built to do a URL action. So just by selecting the type of action, you just put in the URL and then just pass in it the parameters that you wanted. But let's say I wanted to have one of these cause the others to filter. So right now that isn't happening like it did on my other dashboard. Well, what I can do is I can just use this little icon to say use this filter. So now Tableau will use the information that's available in this sheet as a means of filtering all the rest of it. So now I click on the US, and now you can see that it's filtered all of those others because I selected it as a URL action. Now, if I do the same thing over here, that same action isn't happening because I didn't turn on the action filter there. But if I turn it on now I get the same behavior that I was seeing with the others. Somebody asked, since Tableau is live, is the data constantly updating, numbers changing? Absolutely. If you are connected to a live data source, as long as you're hitting refresh on your dashboard, so right here it's all So you can either pause it or set it to active, and as you either hit F5 or jump off the dashboard and come back, then the data is going to requery. If you want the data to not change, that's when you could use the Tableau Data Extract feature to create a snapshot of it. So somebody is asking about a KPI chart or a balanced scorecard. Yeah, I don't have one quickly available to you, but you can kind of get to that with, something similar to this. Maybe you could do it from an executive summary. You could have what you want as some metrics. We certainly kind of achieve that through the sales tracker of putting in, kind of what the goal was as a reference line. So the last person asked about, I've connected to an Excel file, and when I click refresh, it doesn't refresh. Well, one of the things you have to make sure that you do in the Excel file is if you've made a change to the data, you have to make sure you've clicked save before you then click refresh in the Tableau workbook. The Tableau is looking at what the timestamp was, and if it doesn't see that the last modified date of the Excel file has changed, it's not going to query it again. And we're doing that just to increase the performance of the user, so they're not always constantly waiting for queries. These are all awesome questions. Any others that I missed? Awesome. Thank you very much for your time. If you do have additional questions, please contact your sales rep, and they would be able to get a hold of me. And this entire presentation has been recorded and will be available for all of you to look at your leisure at another time. Thanks again.